Yo, what's going on? It's Ed Gallo. This is the Wrestling for MMA podcast. This is my 10th episode, which is pretty nuts. Yeah, I mean, I just kind of started this on a whim. So here you go, podcast. First few episodes were awesome. First batch. I didn't really plan on having this be an interview show, but the interviews have been really amazing. I started just by bringing on my buddy Zach, who was a wrestling coach, and I wrestled D3, and it definitely evolved a bit from there. From Hudson Taylor, three-time All-American, really thoughtful, amazing guy. Dennis Bermudez was freaking crazy. I love that. Mark Munoz, NCAA champion, UFC veteran, crazy, crazy stuff here. I'll get back to having guests eventually. Really, the process for me having guests is that Philippe and Ben and some of my other staff members get these interviews, and I'm like, oh, that guy's a wrestler. Like, you gotta let me in on that one, and it becomes my interview. So I just steal from them mostly. So I'm not like out here hunting my own interviews. Excuse me. So they're not gonna be that consistent, but yeah, the guys just went crazy with interviews for a few weeks there. So yeah, we had a lot of them. It was fun. It was fun. But I want to talk about other stuff now as well. I just feel like it's all been building up. I asked you guys for questions like over a month ago, and I am getting to them now. So here you go. I hope you remember if you asked a question or not. I'm not going to get to all of them, but I'm going to get to a lot of them, I would say. Before I do that, I want to talk about a wrestler in MMA. It's like what the podcast is about, right? I want to talk about Aljamain Sterling. I've always liked Aljamain Sterling, just because he's an outside shooter. He pulls it off, and I like that he's kicky and long, and like I kind of aspire to be like him a little bit in terms of what I do. Not what he does with his boxing, but a lot of the other ideas about his game. I dig what he does. And he just has a cool way about it. And his mat wrestling, his grappling is probably the best part of his game. But as we know, that won't matter that much if you don't have a reliable system of getting to the ground. I don't. I wouldn't say he quite has a system yet, just because he has a few different looks that he goes for, and they all vary in efficacy. And I think in terms what opponent things would work well against, I think it's pretty universal that there's certain things he's better at and that conceptually work better. So it makes more sense to do that. At the end, I'll tie this all into how I see him matching up with Cory Sandhagen, just because Sandhagen, is that it? I'm gonna say Sandhagen just because it's more natural to me. I'm sorry, Cory, if that's wrong. I'm sorry to Sean Madden, who's like the only person that would speak to Cory that might listen to this. But yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting matchup to me, and I think a lot of it depends on whether or not Sterling can get consistent top positions. So I definitely want to talk about whether or not I think that's possible. But yeah, I think just breezing through some of the footage I have, some of the clips I made. I'm prepping for an article. This is like the Mike Brown podcast where I gave you guys a preview of what I was working on for the Mike Brown article, and then I never did the Mike Brown article. So at the very least, you get it in the podcast here, just in case it never makes it to print. With the Mike Brown thing, I just it was too much work. I'm like, I'm gonna do the takedown breakdown series instead, which ended up being so much less work. So I'm it's a little stress relieved. I got a lot going on in my life, So I still have all the clips for the Mike Brown article. I'm sure I'll do it eventually. It's just like it's hard to get up for like a big fighter breakdown. I like smaller things because I can get really detailed and not take that much time on it, which is a perfect marriage of content. So if you're wondering what I'm up to, that's what I'm up to. But yeah, let's talk about Aljo. In terms of his credentials, I don't really care at this point. If they don't have like significant results against like D1 or D2 or freestyle guys that I know, or like high school results that I would know, it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, he has two All-American finishes in Division 2, Division 3. It means he's good. It's not a big deal. I don't get bogged down in credentials. I try not to. I like to correct people when they're wrong about credentials, but I don't place a whole lot of stock in them just because it means nothing. It means nothing about how you're gonna do once you get here. It speaks to what kind of caliber of athlete you are. If you're successful at D1 level, I can assume that you're a great athlete. I think the same can be said for most NCAA levels of wrestling. It's super tough no matter what division. Um, Everyone's taking it seriously for the most part. It's still a national level competition. Trust me, just trust me on that. So I'm not going to talk about his credentials very much. He's a New York guy. New York's great for wrestling in high school. I'd say they're a top 5-6 state just in terms of high school results and recruits. So yeah, he's got a good pedigree, but I believe from the matches I've seen, he was very funk style. Basically the years after Askren, everyone was like, I'm gonna do this because it is so much more fun and like more of a system and a little less effort in some ways. A little more reliable to at least get to in some ways, to be funk rolling on people and leg passing and scrambling as defense instead of like having a shutdown style. Because I mean, honestly, if you're super concerned about defense, it'll be harder to get to your attacks. And isn't it more fun just to press your offense than if someone shoots on you, you dive on their leg and get into a crazy leg passing battle and get to scramble your way out of it and maybe get a takedown out of it and probably get a stalemate if you're good at it. There's a ton of guys like that in college. A guy right now competing, if you just want to see someone doing it like today, 157 pounder for Ryder, Jesse Della Vecchia. He is, well, first of all, another Jesse is Jesse Delgado, who was a 2-time NCAA champ for Illinois. He beat Nico Megaludis. He beat Nashon Garrett. He's super tough. He's going to do MMA, by the way. That'll be answer to a later on question, but he's a super funk roll happy guy, and like it's so frustrating because Nashon Garrett has super clean leg attacks in the NCAA finals. He kept hitting them on him, and Delgado kept rolling underneath and stalemating the action, and just not engaging in a neutral battle, and just like keeping everything crazy and tangled up on the mat. And then eventually he won because he's super good on top, and he's fine in neutral. He was good in neutral, but his scrambling and his funk was definitely a huge part of his game there. That's how he beat Nico. Yeah, shout out Jesse Delgado for making me crazy. Jesse Della Vecchia is doing that these days. Not at the same level, but he's pretty solid. This guy that jumped around weight classes a lot, which is always interesting. I interviewed him at a tournament. That's why I know so much about him. But yeah, it's definitely a common thing. I think it was more common the first couple of years after Askren, just because everyone's like, this is the new thing. Like, I don't need defense. I can do this. And a lot of people were right, but basically everyone knows how to deal with leg passing at that level at this point. But yeah, I saw Aljo doing some stuff there, and it's cool. I think Brett Johns tries to hit a Granby on him in their fight, and Aljo knows exactly what to do, and he passes a leg of his own. He gets height with it, so Johns can't move him around from there. So it's basically similar dynamics to the leg lock game in jiu-jitsu, just because you have to think about it. It's so similar with how you offset someone's weight, by attacking their legs. I don't know a ton about it, but I just, I know the basics, and the basics are similar. But Aljo hasn't had to rely on funk too much. I mean, the funkiest ever got was when he slipped kicking against Barao and had to leg lock his way out of that situation. But he might say the like philosophically funky styles, like going for weird stuff. That he like hits the Suloev stretch and uses that as a breakdown, from tripod and from rear standing and stuff like that when he has the back. That's something you could do in college theoretically. You can't knee bar someone, but you can break them down by attacking the leg when you're on their back. It's definitely possible. But yeah, I didn't look at too much tape of his college career. It's just not important. But yeah, let's just get into a little mini breakdown here. So. When a wrestler transitions to MMA, usually you see a couple different things, and these are all true for Sterling. Most of the time they're taking people down. It's because the competition level is a little lower. People are a little more skittish, especially when you're facing a good wrestler. You either like completely shut down, or you get like over aggressive and jumpy, and like your stance falls apart a little bit, and everything looks a little sloppier. Dustin Poirier versus Khabib is a good example of that. Just of Dustin seeming to like lose ability on the feet, just because he's like not sure, what's okay. Like, can I step this way? Like, can I put pressure here? Like, can I move forward? Which was an unfounded fear because Khabib is not a reactive shooter, so that's not exactly when you need to be worried about that, but I get it. I get it. I get the idea. And that's not to say that Khabib can't like suddenly close distance and shoot on you. It's just like if you are actually pressing him backward, it's not as much of an issue as like just advancing. Maybe more of an issue there. But yeah, early on, like guys like Hugo Viana, who I actually liked at the time. I saw that one live. Um, Cody Gibson, even who is a wrestler. Folks like that, they're coming forward, they're swinging, their hips are exposed. They're on one level, so it's pretty easy to level change and get to a double opportunity or a single opportunity. What's cool about Aljo is that his punching mechanics are tighter now, but they were super sloppy for a while. But that actually worked out for him because he could be like level changing and like winging a crazy loopy overhand, and he'll end up with double unders. He'll end up with a body lock just because like if he was punching a little tighter, maybe he'd end up clashing with the elbow, or the window wouldn't be the same for where he's reaching, and his punches are all just kind of like clinch entry opportunities. So when you're a lanky or taller guy for your weight class, it's definitely harder to get like a nice level change to hit the legs the way you want to. So especially in MMA when you're not dropping all the way down anyway. So super early on when he was closer to his roots, you see Aljo like taking full penetration steps and hitting the knee and all that, and actually having more success finishing from that in that style just because he's closer. It's a bit more controlled and like he can finish on the mat and not have to stand him up and finish. He's not quite as good at finishing singles from standing, which becomes an issue later. We'll talk about it. Yeah, when you're a little bit taller, it's hard to get to the legs like that. So being able to like come off the legs right into like a body lock or double unders or something, some clinch position is usually helpful. Although strangely enough, he's eager. He's enthusiastic about finishing upper body takedowns, but I wouldn't call him exceptionally skilled in that area. I think it's like a skill set he has, but it's not like a huge threat. You know what I mean? It's not like Henry Cejudo's inside trip where like, yeah, he's probably going to hit this on you if you get into over-unders with him. Yeah, he hit like a really nice, like a Polish throw basically, similar mechanics, but it was just off an underhook. I think he had like an over-under body lock. I mean, I can pull it up right now. I can look at it. Oh yeah, since I'm watching it. Basically, Augusto Mendez was targeting the body. He was loading up a lot. His entries were pretty predictable about when he was going to throw punches. So Sterling was not having a hard time, moving and moving his way into clinches and other spots. Although he didn't want to shoot straight in on this guy just because Augusto Mendez, Tanquino, is very credentialed at grappling. He's got a dangerous guard. You don't want to screw up and put yourself in a bad position there. But basically, Sterling's weaving back and check hooking. Mendez, level changes and just rises back up into the clinch. So it wasn't anything special that Aljo was doing. Just like avoiding the collisions and staying in the pocket and ending up in these clinch positions. So just being relatively cool under pressure is enough to get clinch positions some of the time. Yeah, he gets an underhook. He gets double unders. Oh yeah, it's a double under body lock, and he runs him back, steps around on the right, and it's a sag throw, but it's not a sag throw like Van Askren hit on Damian Maia, where he just kind of fell back and torqued him backwards. So Maia was twisting over his base leg. He had nowhere to go because the leg is tripped by the weaving leg of the attacker. This is similar. I like to do this to my girlfriend, and I never hit it because she won't let me finish it. When I hug her, you collapse in and you step around to the side, and instead of like looping and like pulling the leg, you just use your knee on the inside of their knee, on the outside of their knee rather, and collapse it in, and then torque that body lock and twist it over that side so they can't plant on that leg and they'll go over. But yeah, Aljo did it in a cool hoppy motion. It was really nice. So yeah, that's how I done Augusto Mendez. But other than that, he had like a failed body lock on Brett Johns. He hasn't done too much from the upper body positions, so that's not really a factor here. So I really focused on the shooting mechanics, like the shooting game of Aljo, which is 95% of the time how he's trying to operate. It's interesting just for someone that tries to be so long and kicky. Dominic Cruz did a good job explaining it just because it's conceptually similar to what he does, where he's making you want to close distance on him by being very high volume with his kicks. It's just annoying. Like no one in the UFC, for the most part, has good enough kick defense where he can't just spam kicks. I mean, he's got good mechanics on them. They're fast, so they don't need to be perfect. They don't need to be well set up. He can just throw them, and people will be like, "Ow, stop kicking me," and they'll try to close him down. And when people are trying to close you down, it's a lot easier to get to their legs because they're, stepping into your range. You can time them, and also you don't have to, find ways into that distance yourself. You can just let them come to you and keep kicking, and then, oh, here they are. What's tricky for Aljo is that he is not like a great reactive double type of guy. He's hit some, uh, but it's not so simple. Like Cody Gibson rushing in and like he level changes and he throws an overhand, but the overhand was so wide and Gibson was rushing in so hard he just ends up getting a body lock and running him to the cage. Oh, he tried to hit that same like sag Polish throw finish there. That's funny. But like Hugo Viana, just winging an Aljo level changes and goes head outside on the double, and he finished body lock there too. So in his earlier career, he was much more dependent on finishing body lock. But I guess that speaks to the point that I started to make when I began that sentence, was that, with Aljo's shooting style, being super reactive doesn't suit him all that well, just because it takes so much more effort for him to make a full level change and get to the legs. John Jones has a really similar issue. He's having that issue right now. Which is interesting because now he's like much more committed to a pressure style, and I think it's good for him because his best wrestling work has always been on the cage, getting wrist control and hitting doubles on the cage. So, it could work out, but yeah, when he's getting pressed or like if he has any fear of like forward pressure, which he should because he's bad off the back foot and he has one line of defense. If you get past it, he's kind of screwed besides his awesome chin. Like we saw against Dom Reyes. But he doesn't really have in his back pocket like gonna hit you with a reactive shot and it's definitely gonna work. People thought that his reactive shot attempts against Gustafsson were clinch setups, but I think upon rewatching it, it was just him failing to double Gustafsson. I said Gustafsson the first time. I'm gonna correct myself. I'm not gonna keep that up. I like to say names correctly, but sometimes it's too silly. Goose. That's not cool. Not that Gus is cool, but like I don't know. I just don't want to disrespect him like that. So it's Gustafsson. But yeah, I think that was just him failing to take Gustafsson down and ending up at the clinch where he's good. And it's like, oh, okay, I don't really have to commit to this double now. If I fail it, yeah, I'm in the clinch. But I don't think he shot to get into the clinch. I think it was just like a fail safe. Anyway, Aljo has a similar issue where he's tall and it's hard to take full level changes, especially when you're trying to be in a striking stance and you're still learning striking, which is also true of John Jones. Ooh, ouch. So that wasn't really his best option, unless guys were just charging in on him, which pretty much never happened again after those first few fights. You can see this really well against Takeya Mizugaki, where Mizugaki is feinting his way in, and even though he doesn't have great takedown defense, he doesn't at all actually, it was still Aljo hitting these reactive shots when Mizugaki wasn't compromised in his position, so the takedown did not come easily. Plus now, Mizugaki isn't charging straight forward, so the level change isn't really, deep enough. The penetration step isn't deep enough that he can get to a double, and he's a head inside single guy anyway, so it's not like that's really there. And when you're in your stance and a guy's closing on you too fast, he didn't really have time to set your feet and look for the double, and you just kind of drop to whatever's there, and it's usually the leg. So he's just dropping in place and hitting a leg and getting underhooked, and he's still taking Mizugaki down because Mizugaki is, kind of unbalanced and not super physically strong, and Aljo's huge. But you can just tell, like, he's struggling a lot to get through these shots. He doesn't really have a strong penetration. He can't really run someone over with a shot. He has good footwork. If he's in on a double, he can finish it or get to a body lock off of it, but he's not the guy that's going to blow you off your feet. So, especially when he's not prepared to intercept you, which he's usually not. I'm watching this fight from 2014, 2015. His last fight against Pedro Munoz, it's the same thing where he's trying to hit these reactive shots against a guy pressuring him super hard. He's getting nowhere, and plus he doesn't want to commit too hard because of the guillotine, which was an issue against a bunch of guys. I mean, he fought Munoz, he fought Tanquinho Augusto Mendez. He fought Brian Caraway. There's been a lot of guillotine artists that he's fought, so maybe that adjusted his tactics. That's one thought on that matter. But basically, what ended up working out for Aljo uh, was proactive shooting, basically creating his own opportunities and not relying on other people, which is difficult with his style, just because he does want to be outside kicking, and not everyone lets him pressure them. Basically, he doesn't have any strategy besides kicking to dissuade pressure and become the pressurer. And he seems pretty content to concede that. We haven't seen him against too many defined pressure fighters to make that call. It's really just Munoz who's like the pressure guy, as far as people he fought. But like even against Asuncao, who says yes, please try to pressure me. He didn't do it. so I don't think he's the guy to become the pressure fighter, which is a shame because I think a lot of his best work has come on when he's on the front foot and he's trying to create action. I would say the earliest times, well, in the early days when he was trying to shoot on his own, it was pretty bad. Not that there's anything horribly wrong with what he was doing. It's just that it's the Khabib issue where if you are taking a shot where you didn't try to create some sort of motion out of them and you're shooting straight on, it's like, cool, I got to the leg, but I didn't put them out of position at all first. You still have to fight through that shot, and in an MMA fight, like actually going through the motions of finishing wrestling motions, it's too much. It's too hard. So that's why I try to differentiate wrestling for MMA and wrestling. You can not necessarily take breaks, but protect yourself a little bit in different ways. Whereas like you don't want to get at all tired in an MMA fight. You don't want your arms to get heavy. You don't have resting positions. Like sometimes you do, but it's too risky. It's too risky to get tired. And Aljo's super fit, but it's still a problem for him, and it leads to failure more likely. So he's hitting these inside singles, and he's a guy that likes to finish on the mat his takedowns. He doesn't like to stand with the leg and finish. And that's super exhausting as well, as standing with the leg and trying to finish over a super long time, and someone's hitting you and they're whizzing hard, pulling your arm down, they're making it difficult for you, and you're trying to hold them against the cage and they're bouncing on one leg, and it's there's a ton going on, and there's no ref to break up the situation usually, so you have to keep going, which makes it twice as hard. So that sucks. And when he's trying to finish it on the mat, being a head inside single guy, trying to be next to the leg, be seated outside the leg. In MMA with no shoes, limp legging and kicking out is pretty much a sure thing, which is why Aldo, maybe not why he structured his stance this way, but why Aldo in his stance, everyone had to basically be shooting singles on him. They couldn't shoot doubles on him because his hips weren't there. His other leg wasn't there, and plus he's so good at pivoting and turning and favoring that hip, also with his lead hand mechanics. So it's like really hard to get to a double on the guy, and even if you do, he's gonna whizzer and try to turn his hips in, so you're still in the single, and then he's just gonna post, create space, limp leg, kick out, and he did that to everybody. So it's like you don't see it as often in MMA, which is weird because you should, because it's not. I mean, yes, it's hard, but if someone's taking their time on the finish and they don't have a super tight clamp and you're sweaty, pretty easy to kick your leg out of there, I think you'll find. Which is what Aljo has run into a couple times. Against Brett Johns, he ran into that. Against Cody Stamann, he ran into that. These guys who with enough competency to realize, like, yeah, I can limp leg and kick out of this. Especially when you're taking your damn time on the mat, like trying to get position and like reach back and cover the hip or something like that, like cheat the finish. In college, that might work out because you have time to do that, and as soon as you get the hand on the hip, it's 2 and you get points. Here you actually have to control them, and it's a lot different. So not a great look for him to just take these straight on shots. In the beginning, it was more possible just because the guys he was fighting didn't have good takedown defense, didn't have good wrestling fundamentals, so he could do whatever he wanted to them. But now he's dealing with a higher level of skill, higher level of competency, and it's tougher to get to the range he wants because they're better strikers as well. So that complicated things. So what did he do? A few different things against a few different people. I don't think his style is solidified yet. I don't think his approach is solidified yet. He's very much still a developing fighter in my eyes, even though he's reaching close to his prime. He's 30 years old. He's 30 years old. He's been fighting for it's got to be close to 10 years now. yeah, 2011. So he's been fighting for 9 years. Uh, he's had over 20 fights. Uh, it's creeping up. It's creeping up. He hasn't taken a ton of damage. I mean, he did get that cold Moraes knockout, but I think he's a few fights away from maybe the best we'll see from him in terms of a combination of skill and physicality. That doesn't mean he won't get better at fighting. It just means like his body will not keep up probably, and his best is probably a few years away. And this is a weird thing to say about a guy who's on a 4-fight win streak, but I don't know. I think he's got to figure this out if he wants to be championship level and sticking around and being that guy. Because I think he has the potential. I think it's there. He just has to hammer down his style a little bit more. And it's hard to decide what that actually means just because a few different things have worked for him. So I think one of the best looks I've seen from him was against Brett Johns. The way he created opportunities in open space. One of the things I really, really like that he's doing that I think he should keep doing is shooting off kicks. Shooting off his own kicks, not shooting off his opponent's kicks. Shooting off your opponent's kicks is cool if you have like a really good hair trigger on seeing kicks coming, or if you've picked up a pattern of when to make them kick. But that's so hard. That's such a hard game to play. It's like, I'm going to make you kick, and here I'm going to design my whole game around you kicking. I'm going to know exactly when you do it. Like, it's being reactive, and being reactive is reliable. It works a lot of the time if you see it coming, but having to like figure it out and wait for it to come is like just such a excruciating game to play, being so reactive, counter reliant. If you look at Yoel Romero or Valentina Shevchenko, like you have to have a crazy mentality to be able to pursue that fight with such discipline. Holly Holm, like I think the heavy hands guys have talked about it. Like, you have to be boring. You have to be okay with being boring and not get bored of being boring, and you gotta do your thing and you gotta stick with it. Like, I don't recommend that for anyone. Like, you have to be insane to pull that off. So, proactive kicking, proactive opportunities, proactive shooting instead of reactive. Reactive's always there, but I don't think your game should be reactive unless your striking game is super well suited to running people into stuff and creating opportunities, which basically just means be good at boxing. You have to be a good boxer, which is like a tall order, because that's a lot of work, and they're working on so many other things, and you have some of the other tools at your disposal to take shortcuts. So why not take shortcuts? So here we go. Aljo kicking. So Brett Johns loads up on an outside rear low kick and combos it into a lead hook as Johns tries to recover in his stance because the low kick put him off. And then as soon as Johns is back in his stance, Aljo's still in front of him. He goes to shoot. He goes to throw a punch. And Aljo basically does that same overhand entry we talked about and hits that level change under the window of John's lead arms. They're in a closed stance, an open stance matchup here, rather. So Aljo stepped his lead foot outside of John's lead foot. Pretty deep penetration outside the foot there. It's like the Russian outside step setup. He's taking that full level change, and he's hitting a little duck under and coming up into a body lock, and this is when he throws himself on his back. But the entry was great, and it's just the point that Aljo is getting his combos off, and he's timing when the counter is going to come. He can see it. So yes, it's a reactive shot in a sense, but he created the opportunity. I call that proactive, in my opinion. He made that happen. I'm looking at another example here. Just real basic stuff. Johns is pressuring super hard. Aljo is backing up, and he feels out with his lead hand on John's guard because John was using the high forearm guard. He fakes back down to the body, and he showed that bump level change a couple times with his lead hand. Like he's about to fire back, which is what he does when he's on the back foot. He throws a lot, high volume. Basic level change, fake up, level change to the head outside to double, switches off to the single, and that's where he gets kind of stuck. So this whole article is going to be about the entries of Aljamain Sterling because his finishes are not as good as his entry. He's got a really quick shot, which is great, which is why I think he uses it inefficiently sometimes just because it's so easy for him to get to shots. But yeah, his finishes sometimes lead him into trouble. I mean, he didn't take down Jimmy Rivera once. You remember that fight as him like controlling Rivera the whole time. He didn't take him down. Just held him against the cage. He got to his shots, but he didn't do anything with it. He won because he outstruck him. But maybe he outstruck him because he was tired from being held. Who knows? Who knows? But the point is, he's not a super efficient finisher. Keep that in mind. But he's great at getting to shots, and that's the whole thesis of this article. Is he can get to legs pretty consistently. One more Brett Jones example. Just a jab, level change into a double. But I mean, that seems like basic stuff. He wasn't doing it before. He wasn't jabbing and level changing. He wasn't incorporating these wrestling setups into his striking mechanics. Basically, besides that overhand, that was the only thing he had going for him. And you don't think of Aljo as an overhand guy, like meat and potatoes, overhand unga wrestler, but he was. He totally was. Okay, I lied. One more. He throws a front kick, a rear leg front kick, and right off the front kick, he drops into his level change because I think a couple other times before that, he had shown front kick into a straight as he was putting his arm back down instead of the straight, and Johns lifts up the high guard. He pops under for the entry. So just having a lot of different combinations, a lot of different looks you like to throw, which is one of the strengths of his striking game, and just building shots into them. You wait to see what your opponent has learned about your combinations. What are they reacting to? What is that reaction? What does that open up? And I mean, if you have a quick leg attack, if you have a quick single that you can get to, then I mean that's very versatile because it doesn't require a huge reaction. They just need to raise their arms up and be in front of you for 1 second. You can be on their leg. What I think moving forward is going to be sustainable for him is doing this against the cage because, like I said, his finishes are not all that great. I compared him to Khabib, but I think what Khabib has going for him is he's super duper strong. He's not quite as tall, so like lifting on finishes and getting underneath people is a lot more of a thing. And again, he is specialized in lifting singles. He's very good at lifting with his head inside or head outside. And all he has to do is lift to straighten you up, and then he can trip out the base leg. Because if you're being lifted, it's very hard to be wide in your stance. It's basically impossible. So you can't do anything about your leg being very close to your other leg and there for tripping. Aljo doesn't really have that, and I don't think he should have that. He's much more of a cardio, speed, lanky strength kind of guy. He doesn't have that core power. Maybe he does, but it would probably be tiring. And he has tired himself out before, trying to be strong, like against Brian Caraway. He tried to submit him with a full Nelson, and that was not the best idea. But yeah, in a few of his fights, he showed how he can be good against the cage. I would say Barao was the first time, Renan Barao. And he showed also just the overall craft to be, contentious in the clinch against good guys. Basically, Barao is trying to punch him along to the fence with an underhook. It's not a good position. Barao is completely bent over and has no base, no stance. But Aljo just, fishes his hand inside the hip and uses that as a lever while pulling on his underhook to turn him as they hit the fence. So he's not trying to push back. He's reversing the momentum. So it just shows he has a good overall feel in the clinch, even if I talked a little trash on his upper body takedowns before. So that's that nice little outside trip. Yeah, and because he's so good at digging underhooks, because I think probably because his punches are so wide, that's why he gets there so often. He'll always have that leverage. So I think pursuing clinch opportunities is going to be a good look for him moving forward. Plus, he doesn't have to level change as much. I'm basically encouraging him to be more like John Jones, but I think he could be. I mean, he already is, but he could be so much more with the same approach. Basically, super pressure heavy. Clinching, shooting to the cage, finishing shots in the cage, stuff like that. I think that could be his thing. And being a cage shooter, by the way, when you have super long arms, like Kevin Lee or John Jones, is awesome. Because even if they underhook you, you can still probably reach to get around both legs and finish doubles. And he has shown to be pretty strong in that regard. So that is how he got Barao down. That was the first time Renan Barao had been taken down in UFC history. So it's a big deal, even if Barao was washed. We also saw near the cage, he's using these advanced, striking setups that we're seeing against Johns, where he's building the shots into his combinations. They're in open stance. He fires off his rear straight. Barao slips outside, and Aljo slips back under the posting hand, so he's slipping and posting. Aljo slips under it, comes up, snatches up double collar tie, knees, comes right back in, takes a side-on stance to step in with his jab. Goes in with his jab again. Barao goes to swing back because you're so hittable in the stance. It's crazy. And that's when Aljo level changes and gets that double. So he's got ideas like with his crazy striking that he does, where like not everything looks like a good idea. It is kind of bait a lot of the time. It's like, come on, hit me. And when you're that long, people have to reach to try to hit you, and people get suckered into shooting for the head all the time instead of hitting the body, which is super available against Aljo, by the way. As it is with a lot of MMA fighters, it's just a thing. I don't want to get into it. But yeah, I mean, he does appear to be very punchable, and he's often swaggering about and showboating a bit. So I think that encourages a lot of fighters who are a little easier to anchor to swing on him. But yeah, I think he can bait people into standing tall and raising up their hands pretty easily to get these shot opportunities. So because he's not like much of a penetrator on his shots, he just needs to get to the legs or get to the hips. I think just raising the level, raising the hands is more important than drawing them in, than being an out fighter. He's been successful, but I just don't think it's a strategy that's going to hold up. And he needs to prepare to fight Peter Yan. And he can't let Peter Yan pressure him. No one can. No one can let that happen. Unless you dead him with a counter while he's doing that early on, Marlon Moraes, he's going to get you. He'll get you, especially over 5 rounds. You're done. So I don't care. I don't care how many times you kick him. I don't think it's going to work. So I think you need to turn the tables on him. You need to get him on the back foot and disrupt his pressure and disrupt his momentum. Magomedov did that way back when. Basically, every time there was space, he was contentious in the striking at the time, but he was shooting from the outside a lot. He wasn't hanging back. He was making his shots happen. But yeah, Aljo showed he can do that against Barao. He also showed he could do that versus Cody Stamann, and I think that one's actually more important because Stamann was a wrestling threat and Stamann was a pressure threat. Stamann was taking him down the whole fight basically until the end. But Aljo figured out how to draw out Stamann's offense, and Stamann was kicking off the back foot a lot, and Aljo caught one and took him down pretty easily, obviously, because you're kicking with your back to the cage. Not sustainable, but Aljo also does a really good job of flashing his lead hand, touching, flashing, getting those counters, waiting for the next one, then finding his level changes from there. And again, I don't think his entries are spectacular mechanically. There's a lot to be desired, but the ideas are there. He can get to them. He's not scared. That's really important. So I think there's a bright future here. Also, I said it was Brett Johns who tried to Granby roll or funk roll or something. It was Stamann. Stamann tried to roll him, and he caught Stamann's leg and got height with it and posted and got to one knee and got height with it. So shut that on down. This was a pretty disorganized breakdown, but I think the overall idea is what has Sterling been trying to do, what's been working, what hasn't been working, and then let's talk about the Cory Sandhagen fight. Here's my deal. I was talking about guys who funk first, ask questions later, scrambling as your first line of defense. I think that's Cory Sandhagen. Some people have said that about Yan. I don't think Yan he says, oh, oops, what's takedown defense? I'm just going to scramble. I think his scrambling is what I would call takedown defense, where he's fighting hands and head and stepping over and doing all sorts of, what some might say scrambly stuff. But I think it's all pretty fundamental movements until he gets taken down. Whereas Sandhagen basically concedes, you might get a decent position for a second, but I'm gonna leg pass, I'm gonna roll, I'm gonna knee pull, I'm gonna Granby, I'm gonna do a whole assortment of things to get out of this. But because that was Aljamain Sterling style, I think he'll be pretty good at dealing with that. He was dealing with it with Stamann. He clearly knows how to work with that. He'll be scouting him. He'll be doing a lot of scrambling, a lot of wrestling in practice. So I don't like it if that's going to be Sandhagen's approach, just because my entire rant for the last half hour has been about how Aljo is really good at getting to the legs, and he has a bunch of different ways that he gets to the legs, and even though the finishes are not, he has a few different looks for that, and not all of them are great, it won't matter if Sandhagen is just going to concede and say, okay, you're on my legs, let's scramble, let's go. You don't need to do that. You don't need to do that because Aljo doesn't. You don't have to concede. It's not over if he gets to your legs. There's definitely a chance that it's a no-go. And I think Cory Sandhagen's probably a better wrestler than Brett Johns or Tage Mizugaki. I think he's one of the better wrestlers he's fought. So I think he probably has it in him to disengage and not play that game. And I don't think he's like a Tony Ferguson where you're not going to be able to change his mind about how to do something. I think he's pretty coachable from what I've heard. So I intend on contacting the Elevation Fight Team coaches and being like, "Hey man, like what's the deal here? You gonna scramble with him?" I don't think it's the move, just because Sandhagen's gonna want to pressure. I think that's gonna be great because Aljo seems to be able to accept the role as the back foot fighter, and he did so well against Munoz like that. Although Munoz and Sandhagen are so different as strikers, as pressurers, as like everything's different. So it's not even remotely comparable, except that Aljo will probably be okay not being the one pressuring. I think that's a mistake overall, but it might not matter if he can get to the legs and take him down and win the grappling exchanges and win on top. So I haven't broken down the grappling too much, so I'm not positive that Aljo will win the grappling, but my heart tells me he's a very good top player and that Sandhagen's not. His bottom game isn't the best part of his game, so it's probably Aljo's best thing. It's one of Sandhagen's pretty good things. Usually not a safe bet. So I'm not positive he can stop the fight from being there if he's going to fight the way he usually does. Against like a Sun Tzu, it was great because Sun Tzu was hitting these huge lifts and putting him flat in his back. And there's all this time between the finish and when Sandhagen got to make his next move, so he got to on the way down already be preparing to leg pass and get out of there. So yeah, it's a weird matchup. I'll write the article soon, but now you've all heard all of my thoughts pretty much. I'll just have like the clips and you can see them, and I'll structure it nicely. And maybe I won't write it. No, I'll try to write it. Okay, so that was the Sterling breakdown. What did that take? A long time? Yeah, it took a while. Okay, I said I was gonna do it. So listener questions. It's happening. Okay. It's happening from over a month ago. I didn't want to do all of them just because that's too many, but I'm going to do most of them, and I'll say who they're from, and I will give them all a little bit of time at least, and probably cannot predict at all how this is going to go because I've read all the questions, but I didn't think about them or prepare for this at all. I'm just going to go off the cuff and try to knock them out, and we'll see how that goes. I do not have time to prepare for this many questions, so here we go. I'm going to start with maybe a lesser-known friend. This is Adam Fleischman. I think he has something to do with anthropology. This is the second anthropology guy who's asking questions, which is pretty sweet because I took a decent number of anthropology courses in college, so near and dear to my heart. It's actually on my it's not on my diploma, not on my certificate, but I have a related area, which is like worse than a minor. I have a psych degree and an anthropology related area, so I have very valuable college education there. But it's okay because I got another degree after that and something equally as valuable. So here we go. Anyway, Adam asks, in your opinion, what's the most useful aspect of wrestling for MMA that is invisible to the untrained eye of the casual non-wrestler MMA fan? Example, embracing the grind, head control, balance, etc. So basically, what about wrestling or wrestlers is most useful for MMA that people might not realize? I would say physical factors are probably the biggest thing that people might not understand. Basically, anyone who's ever trained jiu-jitsu or wrestled, obviously, but I think it's more striking for people that do jiu-jitsu, like you're a hobbyist in jiu-jitsu, maybe you played other sports beforehand, but your main grappling, combat sports thing is jiu-jitsu, and you're pretty good at it. And then a decent high school wrestler comes in the room, and you're like, whatever, this guy's skinny, and he just manhandles you. You're like, what is going on here? And yeah, he's using strength, he's trying hard, but you can't do anything about it. I think we've all been there. This guy's just crushing you. You're like, what is this? That's basically it. That's the thing. It's just the different tiers that these people can be on sometimes physically. I have this debate not a lot, but a little bit with people about like how athletic wrestlers are. And I think people misinterpret what I mean. I think in the domains that wrestlers are athletic, it's ridiculous. I don't think they're like well-rounded athletes. I don't think they can do everything. Yeah, if you put like an NBA player in like a combine, like or NFL players do the combine stuff like that. Maybe they wouldn't outperform everyone there in like every single physical task, but like for combat sports, yeah, they can hit really hard, they can explode, they can cover distance. They're super strong. Their cardio is usually great. They're tough. They're insane. Stuff like that. Like those are the things that are really driving them. Like yeah, they come in with a combat sports base. They come with a skill base. They also come with a crazy physical athletic base. And the guys you get transitioning are, as they get to the higher levels, it becomes ridiculous. Like if you watch freestyle wrestling, if you watch the world championships, pretty much all of these guys can pull off stuff that I would reckon even with 10 years of training, most MMA fighters wouldn't be able to do just because their bodies are built differently. They've been doing this since they were 5. Bringing that back to anthropology, it shapes you differently. I talked about this last time I did listener questions. I talked about Mongolian horse archers for some reason. But yeah, when you're doing something since you're 5, like the load on your body makes you grow differently. Like your skeletal system grows differently. Like your bones are denser. It's just a different person than if you didn't do that. It's a big difference, and it's not to say that you're doomed if you don't start wrestling when you're 5. I talked to Mark Munoz. What was he, 13, 14? He was older when he started wrestling, but he was playing sports beforehand. A lot of these guys were playing sports beforehand, so it doesn't have to be wrestling, but for a lot of them, it is wrestling for 25 years, and then they get to MMA, and they're like, okay, I can take down everybody. I can manhandle everybody. These guys are weak. That's what Dennis Bermudez said. Did you listen to that? He said they were weak. He said Jimmy Hedis is weak. He was throwing him around. I've rolled with Jimmy Hedis. He's not weak. He ragdolled me. He manhandled me. Like, how strong is Dennis Bermudez? What is this? So I would say that's the answer. These guys are freaky freaks, and do not underestimate them under any circumstances physically, because they will punch a hole through your face. That doesn't sit. I can't speak for every single wrestler, but overwhelmingly, that's what they're like. So I would say that is probably the biggest thing. I'd also say like knowing how to win, knowing how to compete. Wrestling a ton of matches, having a lot of competition experience, that can be huge. Knowing how to structure a competition and fight multiple times in a day, multiple times in a month. Cutting weight, knowing how to train for combat sports. Just being a lifelong combat sports athlete is a huge deal. Like, you have so much experience in the industry. That's a huge leg up. So tons of reasons, but that's a really good question. And I think embracing the grind, kind of what I said, like training hard, working hard, that's important. Head control, sure. Technical details, that's wrestling, but balance, physicality. But yeah, that was a really good question. So I bumped that up in the order. He responded later, but I said that's a good one to start with. We good on time? We're okay on time. Now for a more important question from Sandro, my man, Cool Thought, Jab Zuda, who was on the DC alternate commentary podcast with Danny Martin. He was in episode 4. That was so good. Good job making your commentary debut, Sandro. That was really good. You're funny. You're a funny guy. But Sandro very seriously asked, what is the most effective way to wrestle with the latent emotional effect of one's parents' divorce? And that's heavy, that's a really heavy question. Divorce is very serious and traumatic. I think when, you're getting heavy pressure like that, like heavy forward, like crushing pressure like that, redirecting rather, that pressure is the best way to wrestle with it. So I think like a post duck under, like a really sharp dropping, like super duck would be a good way to wrestle with that. If you've seen like Bo Nickel do it, you yourself sent me a clip of Dustin Ortiz and Justin Scoggins. And Ortiz is pressuring in, and suddenly Scoggins like posts up and drops, and Ortiz bumps forward a little bit because all that pressure was broken, like tectonic plates, and he hits that duck under and like slides over to his back. That was cool. So he would do that because the divorce is just pressuring forward like that. It's so heavy. You just gotta find like where there's a window for you to slip through and just push off to one side, let that pressure go past. You hit that duck under, you're behind it. Now you're the boss. That's my answer to that. Next question is from Aiden, who is a brilliant analyst on the come up. He might be a teenager. That makes me feel bad. He was very good at this point. I was only this good like a month ago. It's crazy. Uh, he asks, how much does takedown defense vary when you add the use of upper body takedowns? For example, Tyron Woodley could stuff Maya's doubles, but got manhandled by Usman in the upper body takedowns. To speak to that example, I mean, I think Usman would also have taken him down with doubles in space, too, also. But it's definitely different, and people have different skill competencies in different areas. So I think that would be the first thing that you add in. But in MMA, it's weird because in wrestling, if I get like an over/under body lock, you're probably gonna get your hips back, like way back, and there's not much I can do about it. In MMA, if you get your hips way back, I can knee you in the body, and you'll say, "Oh, I want to not be in this clinch anymore, or I don't want this space to be here for you to knee me," and they're gonna change what they're doing. And I think it's actually easier to take people down upper body in MMA than it is to shoot on them, depending on who the person is. You have to be good at upper body takedowns and have to be able to get to those positions. But I mean, that's a really simple dynamic, is changing the space, manipulating positioning based on striking in the clinch. And I'm sure that's something a bunch of talented Nakamoi do. There's a whole system for that could probably be incorporated into MMA. That Ryan or somebody, Kyle, would be more, better to talk about that. But I've been asked that question and like different versions of that question about upper body takedowns a few times. And I think that's the next development in the meta. I might have just answered another question. Damn, I did. I'll get to that one next. Kieran asks, I'm just going to go right into it. Kieran asks, changes you expect in the wrestling MMA metagame? Yeah, I think upper body is going to be more common. I think you're going to find more people finding entries for clinch opportunities. You have better clinch entry artists and better clinch striking to clinch takedown technicians, people who can link those things together, or at least like get to shots out of the clinch, depending on those reactions. I did an article on how John Jones used the clinch to get to his double on the cage. I wrote an article about how Hector Lombard just manhandled Jake Shields. Oh my god, he embarrassed him. So did Akiyama, didn't he throw Shields? That was funny. But no, Lombard beat him the whole time. And basically, a really simple thing. John Jones has done this as well. They were in underhook and collar tie, and they're in open stance. Lombard hits the outside knee to the body, and Shields turns his hip in and gets closer, and he turns side on. So they're already open stance, and he goes all the way to be sideways with them. And if you're a judo guy, you're just licking your chops, because if somebody's standing completely sideways like that, you can push them left or right, and they're going to go either way. You can't push them backward, but you don't need to. And he foot sweeps him. It's pretty great. So check that article out. It's on Bloody Elbow. But yeah, I think that's the next development in the meta, is people getting a little more tricky with their clinch offense, just because it's less risky to do that than to shoot on somebody. It takes less energy. There's less consequences in terms of being countered. It's just way easier. People should do it. It's less, it's not as fast. It's a little bit of a slower process, and like you end up in a little more even ground, and it takes longer, but it's probably more sustainable if you're like an old guy. You could probably do that for longer than shooting on people. Like, do you think Khabib's style is going to age well? Probably not. He's going to retire sooner than later. So that's probably like a good old man way to fight, I would say. Plus, strength is less than they go, and all you really need is timing and strength to pull some of that stuff off. Besides understanding the mechanics. Unless you're just super fragile at this point, and like one little knee to the side is going to bust you up. But I think that's the answer to both of your questions, Aiden and Kieran. Okay, next one. It was a follow-up from Aiden. Sorry, you're not done, Aiden. Is there a certain system to scrambling? What are the keys to constantly build bases, etc.? I think scrambling's a catch-all term for anything that's a transition between positions, or if anything that isn't a solid position, just like a series of positions is a scramble. So I think there's systems to being able to go through all these different positions, but that's all very specific information based on what those positions are and how you plan on transitioning from them. It's basically just like hitting fast forward on the regular match. You're just basically not able to lock down positions, and you're just transitioning from one to the other. If you take me down, I go to sit out, and you go to hit a suck back and like pull my head to the ground, and I belly down, spin down, then you come forward and I'm on your leg, and then I build up and get my head underneath, and then I post and I hit a sit out, and then I'm on your back, and then I roll through, and like that was a scramble. But a bunch of different things happen there. There's no system. It was really just me knowing what to do in all those positions and just moving immediately. And so maybe that's the system. Is just keep moving, keep going, don't break. Just keep going and go to your best thing that you have in each position, like Dustin Ortiz and Joe B. Joe B is on his back, and Dustin Ortiz hits a headlock from the side. He reaches back and hits a side headlock, and is able to step over and go into a new position. Like stuff like that. Just like doing what you know, keep it going. Having a lot of different looks, having a lot of different things that you know how to do, I would say is important. Also having the conditioning to keep doing that is important. But no, I think those are the keys, but I wouldn't say there's a system. I think it's just like you have to know a lot of different stuff about positions. You have to be very positionally educated. And usually, it's funny, lighter guys end up doing that, I think, for two reasons. One, because it's, they can do more stuff because they're lighter. It's less of a load in their body. But also, lighter people, usually in a room, there's less of them. And you have to train with people who are bigger than you. This has been my experience. And it's harder to hold down positions and get things cleanly on bigger people. So you're used to having to create more scramble situations and out hustle them. So you just kind of get to know those systems and become comfortable with them, and you kind of have a game based around that. So you have memory, you have muscle memory of doing all that stuff. That's probably what it is. But I mean, maybe someday I'll get a better scrambler on the podcast. I'll get Max Roscoff and we'll talk about it. Cool. Thanks, Aiden. Good questions as always. The real Shamil, my boy, asks, how does wrestling even work? Why aren't MMA fighters smart enough to just stand back up? In general, I don't know why wrestling works, man. Like when two people have a wrestling match, I'm like, why don't you just, not let them take you down? It's pretty easy. But yeah, in MMA, I think wrestling works because, if Conor McGregor and Khabib got into a wrestling match, obviously Conor wouldn't get taken down, because he'd just say, no, do not take me down. But in MMA, he can be like, oh, I will strike with you, Conor, and then Conor will foolishly believe that he's going to strike with him, and then he'll take him down because he's too busy thinking about striking. So I think that's why wrestling works, just because it's a fake art. It's the art of tricksters. But MMA is a sport that lends itself to a lot of trickery. So you can fool people into thinking that you're not going to do the cowardly, trickster martial art, but really you had it planned the whole time. That's really all what my series are about, is how to trick people into think you're fighting when really you just want to wrestle, and hug. So I think that's the answer to your question. Michael Fidel, which wrestling prospects who have stated intentions of transitioning to MMA are you most excited about? A lot of people have stated intentions about transition to MMA and then they don't do it, which is always annoying. I'll just say, some high-profile people that said they were going to do it that haven't done it yet. Richie Lewis, U23 world champion, wrestled at Rutgers. He did not. He just kept wrestling. I don't know where he's been up to, but hopefully training. Maybe he's doing it, maybe he's not. But yeah, Richie Lewis. And then a similar type of guy, Pat Downey, who was on the 2019 world team, has a junior world medal, I believe. He's decent. He's solid. He's definitely a character. I don't really consider myself a fan of his, from his style or his personality. I don't know. Maybe he's a good guy. I haven't met him. But yeah, he said he was going to do it, and then he didn't do it. He kept wrestling, and then he made a world team, so I guess it was a good thing he didn't do it. But guys that I'm excited about, that said they were going to do it. I mean, first Imar said he was going to do it. Isaiah Martinez, 2-time NCAA champion, 4-time finalist, said he was going to do it. And then he got a job at Oregon State, so I think he's not going to do it. Bunch of people said they're going to do it. Someone that I think is going to do it, is Jordan Oliver. He's talked about it before. Jordan Oliver, NCAA champion. It's been one of the top guys at 65 kilograms for a few years now, and 70 kilograms. I think he's awesome. He has wins over Zane. He goes close with Yanni. He trains with Yanni. A bunch of high profile international wins. I could probably do more research before I start talking about that, but he has a really cool style, really cool wrestling style that I appreciate. But he said he was going to do it. He has a lot of tattoos, which leads you to believe that he'd like to fight in a cage. But yeah, I'm pretty sure he said he was going to do it, and if he doesn't make the team this year, it's likely that he switches over. And then someone that did say they were going to come, that's a pretty big deal, is Bryce Meredith. He's a NCAA finalist for Wyoming. And he's really good. Really good at wrestling. Great leg attacks, good scrambler, high pace. Has a win over Dean Heil, NCAA champion. He's solid. He's a bit of a pretty boy. Like, he's got nice hair and looks like he wears makeup, even though I think that's just his face. So you wonder if he's gonna be cool with getting hit and stuff. But Wyoming's a tough room. If you survive in Wyoming, you're probably a tough guy. Shout out my friend Sam Egan, who tells us all the time about the sadistic training methods of Wyoming wrestling, and they're at elevation too, so it's double sadistic. So I think Bryce will be fine, and he's at a Sanford MMA, which is Henry Hooft. That's Black Cillian's Hard Knocks 365, and now Sanford MMA. So he's there with Storley and Chandler and Usman and probably other people. I think that's a great gym to be at right now if you're a wrestler. That's the new AKA, just getting all the wrestling talent. So that's a bit of an answer, Michael. Thank you. Jack the Good Fighter Shill. I think I recommended that he have that name. I forget what his original name was, but now it's the Good Fighter Shill. In MMA, does the cage benefit offensive or defensive wrestling more? Probably it's a very loaded question, but I'm just gonna go ahead and say it benefits offensive wrestling more. Just because you can take your time on things, you can build, you can stick somebody on it, you can move from position to position. You can get up a little bit easier on the cage, but you're still being controlled when you get up. I think it's a huge benefit to offensive wrestling, especially upper body, clinch wrestlers. That's huge because you can't just back your hips out. You got nowhere to go. It's added a whole new element of how to take people down. So, some people, that's their entire takedown game is the cage. You can't say anyone's entire system is getting on the cage and getting up. So it's I would say offensively, it's a bigger deal. Defensively, it has its merits, obviously, but I think the meta has evolved past people just being able to wall walk and get up, and now it's people want to be on the cage to wrestle. Cool. Smesh Jitsu Only, who we just call Smesh. He's our boy. He's a good guy. I think he's also a teenager. These guys are young, man. They're really smart and funny and cooler than me, and I feel very insecure about all of them. But here he is asking me a question. This is over a month ago. He's probably outgrown me at this point. He asks, is there a most useful takedown? How the jab is one of the most versatile punches to build off of. No, not really. In wrestling, at least, not really. Every takedown requires effort. The jab in wrestling would be more a snap down or a shrug or a shuck or something smaller, a smaller setup movement, like an outside step. So I would say the snap down is the jab. But then as far as most useful takedown, most useful knockout punch, it's the same kind of question. But yeah, the one that I think has most utility in MMA is probably a double, just because reactively it's really great at intercepting momentum, and proactively, if you're pressuring or blitzing and you can get someone to the cage, that's probably the best thing to shoot there. But that's a really simple way of answering that question, but it would require more research to answer that with any more depth, so I'm not going to. Thanks, Mesh. This is from Kieran, and I answered that, but there was a second part to Kieran's question. The first part was changes you expect in the MMA wrestling meta. I said clinch stuff. And then he said, have certain countries' wrestlers had more or less success in MMA due to their style of wrestling? Interesting. I think we're not at the point where we can say that yet, because not enough countries' wrestlers have gone into MMA. So I think it's mostly just been a byproduct of like the infrastructure being there. Like Japan has a decent amount of wrestlers in MMA, but it's like mostly lower level guys for the most part, and or like high level girls. The level of women's wrestling in MMA is pretty high for Japan. That's just because Japan has a big MMA infrastructure. The United States has a big MMA infrastructure. Russia's interesting because they do have a big MMA infrastructure, but they also have a big wrestling infrastructure to keep those guys wrestling. And most of the people you have transferring that have, I'm doing air quotes, wrestling backgrounds, like weren't at any decent level. So I don't think we can say yet. I don't think we can say yet. I'm interested to find out if like we ever get to that point where there's a bunch of countries who have other guys doing it. But no, I don't think we're there yet. Cool. Thank you, Kieran. This is from, this guy changes his name, so I'm not really sure what to call him, but he's Michael Chies's #1 fan. It's Grand Moff Larkin, also Grand Admiral Khan. I guess it's a playoff of the guy from Star Wars, maybe. I don't know. He can correct me if he wants. I'm sure he'll listen to this. Who are some of the most diverse takedown artists in MMA? Not necessarily best. Basically, who does the most takedowns? I've seen Merab do a wide mix of lower and upper body techniques. Merab Dvalishvili. Yeah, I'd say he's a good shout. I'm not like super high on Merab just because I don't think he's, I don't know. The reason he has to take people down so many times is because, he has some control issues. He definitely weaponizes his cardio. He has a great pace. He's got decent wrestling. He's actually not a wrestler. He's a sambo player and judo, I believe. Ben Cohn interviewed him, so that's where I got that information from. But yeah, people are super high on him. I just, when I see someone who's not efficient with their leg attacks, not efficient with their wrestling, I worry about them because somebody will probably be able to shut that down. Then your game is a little bit neutered pretty early on there. Kill it in its infancy in the fight. So don't love Merab as a fighter, but I definitely appreciate him and like him. But I worry about him moving forward. That wasn't your question. Your question was the most diverse takedown artist in MMA. Well, I think actually Khabib is a good shout, even though he's become much more, head inside single and double against the cage reliant. He can hit a whole bunch of stuff off of clinch positions. He can just bump you forward from where you're standing. He can go over unders. He can go like, I don't think it's Harai Goshi or Osotogari. It might be Osotogari that he hit against RDA, but he's got a good mix of things he can do from upper body. I would say he's more diverse upper body than anything. On that same note, Islam Makhachev is really good, mixing up his shots with upper body. He's more known for his foot sweeps and smaller scale trips, inside reaps than Khabib is, but he's great. While I'm on the subject of Russians, I would say Ali Bagov is pretty damn diverse. He can do a lot between his leg attacks and clinch attacks, which helps when you're hulked up and you can just do anything to anybody. Who else? I mean, John Jones used to be very diverse when he was hitting a whole assortment of throws because people were pressuring into him very stupidly in the clinch. And he had a couple of different leg attacks he would hit. I'm sure there's more people, but I don't really want to think about it right now. Hector Lombard, actually, when he does wrestle, just having a deep judo base, you have a bunch of different moves you can hit that people aren't used to. Plus, he actually does have a good double and good setups for his double. I wrote about that a long time ago, all the different wrestling attacks of Hector Lombard. Cub Swanson, Mike Brown, there's a bunch of guys. I don't know. I should have prepared. Sorry. Hope that helps. AB, my man's, asked best blast double in wrestling. I'm going to assume that means wrestling, and not MMA. People who wrestle. Jordan Burroughs is a common answer. It's a good answer. Anthony Valencia is also a good answer if you're talking U.S. domestic. Case in point, he's still at a very decent level, basically only having a double, so that's big. But the answer is Nate Jackson. He wrestles at the NJRTC. He wrestled for Indiana. He's got like 5 kids, and he can just double people. Pretty much no one else in the world can just shoot their double whenever they want and run through you at a certain level. And he was at the Medved, which is a pretty tough international tournament, and I saw him just running people down. and they couldn't do anything about it. He's one of those long arm people where it doesn't matter if you get underhooks, and he can just get behind your legs anyway, and he has the horsepower to run you over, and he does it to a lot of people. There are other people who have different stances and are a little bit more diligent hand fighting and don't let him get the shots off the same way, and they keep him on the back foot with their offense. So he's not unbeatable or anything, but his double is insane. So watch Nate Jackson. Shout out Nate Jackson. Philippe, my boy, my coworker, he has a question. It is a good one. Can you help me understand all the advantages and disadvantages there are in an MMA fight when it's an open stance matchup? Okay, so it also depends on your stance. So if I am left-footed, if I'm an orthodox fighter, my left foot's forward, you're orthodox, and your left foot's forward, we are in an open stance matchup. So if I throw my lead leg body kick, that'll hit the open side of your body. Okay, so if you take your penetration step, you're going to be basically shooting head outside, and you're going to have a line with your lead arm to their lead leg. So your double's good from there, your high crotch is good from there, and just as far as shots, as far as leg attacks. I don't recommend shooting a high crotch like that, but I do recommend shooting your double like that. So for double legging, closed stance is really good. Open stance is really nice because if I am left-legged and you are in open stance and you're a southpaw, and I have a good outside sweep single, I can hit that really easily because our feet are lined up for me to hit that. Or like I can drop head inside single like Aljamain Sterling, something like that. But it's rocky if I am, if that's not my dominant shooting leg, and I'm orthodox and you're southpaw and we're open stance and I can't shoot a sweep single off my left leg, then I'm kind of screwed. So you have to have diversity of attacks, but assuming like you can get that lined up and that's actually where you shoot off of, then it's fine there. But yeah, basically it's about shot selection, and it just depends on what you're able to do and which leg you use to do that. So it depends for different wrestlers, but basically it's those basic shot dynamics where single legs and sweep singles and outside shots are going to be easier from open stance, and straight on shots like doubles are going to be easier from closed stance. So same with like duck unders and like getting under and getting behind the back, although you can do that from open stance too. It's just a little easier because you don't have to cross their entire body to get there. He asked me to go deep about it, but I can't. I don't want to, so I'm not going to. My man, Pelican Head. I don't know his name. He's an NH Wrestle fan, New Hampshire wrestling fan. So call him PH, Pelican Head. I don't know why he named himself that. Maybe his head is Pelican. Like, he asked for under the radar college guy that you think could have a good MMA career. Well, I thought Dom Voorhees from Pitt was going to do MMA, and I don't know what he's up to, but thought for sure he was going to do MMA. Under the radar guys, maybe not that under the radar, but I think Brock Zackrell will have a really good MMA career if he does that, although he said he's going to coach and do freestyle, so never mind. Like, our definitions of under the radar are so different because, like, I'm thinking under the radar for my audience, which is, like, everybody in college, but for you, like, people. So it's like, I can't really surprise you with anybody, you know what I mean? But I mean, I bet, like, my audience doesn't know who Gable Steveson is. Like, he's going to have a good career if he doesn't go to jail. And so he got arrested recently, if people didn't know. There's a whole scandal about sexual assault, so hopefully that wasn't true. I don't know. I always thought Nathan Tomasello would be a good fighter. He went to Ohio State. It's hard to say. I was really rooting for Pantelio to get into fighting. I was trying to hook him up with Darren Cruikshank so he'd do it, but he didn't do it. But, like, guys I'm enjoying right now in college that I want to do MMA, hard to say. Nick Piccinini, he's crossing over. He's going to be great from Oklahoma State. He's going to be at American Kickboxing Academy with DC and all them. I'm trying to get you just one good example. It's hard. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm not as plugged into college this year as I have been, just because I've been so busy with freestyle and MMA. I'll get back to you on that. Sorry. Another Bajrang boy, another wrestling friend, oldest and greatest, at Oldest Greatest. We did that USA versus Azerbaijan commentary. That was fun. But yeah, he has a good question. Who will end up with the best MMA career? Ed Ruth, Logan Storley, or Aaron Pico? So, background. Ed Ruth, 3-time NCAA champion for Penn State, like one of the most credentialed wrestlers of all time, like top 100 probably. Logan Storley, I think he's a 4-time All-American at 174 pounds in the era where there was like 5 guys that were all national champion caliber guys, like Chris Perry, Andrew Howe, Tyler Wilps, Matt Brown, Robert Kokesh, probably Blaze Butler, Zach Epperly. There's like Kyle Crutchmer. There were like 10 guys who were all really good at that weight at that time. Mike Evans. It was insane. It was nuts. So him not becoming a national champion is not an indictment of his skill set, although he was very boring in college, except for the time he hit an elevator on Mike Evans. That was sweet. But he is at, well, I guess I should back up. Ed Ruth is at AKA now, and I think he was at like Dethrone Base Training Center with Josh Koscheck before that. Well, interesting. But yeah, Storley is with Hard Knocks, Henry Hooft, Sanford MMA, whatever they're calling it these days, with Usman and Chandler and soon to be Bryce Meredith. And the third option was Aaron Pico, 2-time California state champion. Then he dropped out of high school to try to make world teams and go to the Olympics. Then he was runner-up at the Olympic trials, but just in freestyle, he has wins over like David Serafian, I forget how it's said, world champion. So he's pretty good. And obviously his MMA career is rocky thus far. I'm sure that's well documented. I think the answer to that question is Logan Storley. He's undefeated so far. He's been taking his career nice and slow, but I think most of all, outside of career management, he's just with a good camp, and I'm trusting how this camp is developing wrestlers into strikers right now. And I just think he's going to probably have the highest skill competency level, but also be the most like about business, like he's going to have a simple game, and he's going to get to it, and it's going to work for him over time. It's going to be replicable, and I think his heart's in it. I think he's got the right attitude. He just seems like a very professional sort of guy, whereas Pico, like behind the scenes, I think there's been a lot of like hot-head decisions, like not listening to his coaches, and going to Jackson Wink was terrible, and obviously like his durability is already going, even if it wasn't that great to start with. Ed Ruth, his losses are acceptable for the stage of his career, but the way they're happening are just so avoidable. He doesn't have a game. He doesn't have an idea of what he wants to do. He's been learning how to fight, and he's fighting, but he's not like applying any sort of process. And I think when you're a wrestler, it's really important to do that, especially when you're still figuring stuff out. Like you need to be able to get to your wrestling reliably and without too much effort. And it doesn't really matter what your skill level is. At a certain point, you're going to need to have one of the things we've talked about in any of these episodes, like a process, a system. Mark Munoz said it's absolutely necessary, and you're in the past. You're behind if you don't have one. So if you don't want to listen to me, listen to Mark Munoz. So that's my answer. Logan Storley. Thank you. Second to last question. We're almost through. My mouth is so dry. Damn, I should have drank more water. Dan Albert, my boy. Very, very thoughtful man, Dan Albert, and he does a lot of analysis. He famously wrote 24,000 words about Justin Gaethje, a man who has probably not said 24,000 words in his life, so it's like high praise. But yeah, Dan Albert, very thoughtful, so a lot of good points here in this question. How much has having a wrestling background influenced success in MMA in your eyes? Likewise, fighters without a wrestling background who end up being effective MMA wrestlers, any thoughts or speculation over this? Like, why are they successful? I think this goes back to Adam's question, whereas like physically, I think these guys are a different class than a lot of MMA fighters are. And, they have that, lifetime of experience being combat sports athletes, so they know how to do it. They know how to be professionals, but also they have that skill base, and they also know how to win, and they know how to train hard. They know how to like get better at stuff, and it's just, all that. But also, half of fighting is grappling, and you can't grapple reliably if you're not on top. So being able to take people down is pretty important. And if you're a striker, you don't want to be taken down, so being able to not get taken down is pretty easy as well. So having a lifetime of experience in the thing that determines if you get to stand or be on the ground as Joe Rogan would say, like determine where the fight takes place. He's not wrong. That's important. That's really important. It's not that simple, but I think in terms of like why are they successful, those would be the reasons. Also, there are just so many of them, so many wrestlers in MMA, and you don't even know. Like the U.S. alone is overflowing with talented wrestlers. I mean, it's tough. Like participation is down. I mean, it's rising, but it's not good compared to other sports. But I mean, not good participation training people how to kick ass is pretty good for turnout for MMA fighting, especially because not everyone's going to D1 college. They're all fierce competitors and they want to do more. It's like drilled into them when they're little kids that they're going to be these like great competitors, and like they got to want it, and they had this mentality. Like they all have similar mentalities even if they're not the same level. It's hard to dissuade those guys from pursuing further goals. So it's like a lot of the great MMA fighters you see right now got to like a community college or a junior college level and like didn't have the grades or what have you to go higher level, and then they transition to MMA. There's a lot of them. So I think sheer numbers is probably why it's working. And then fighters without wrestling backgrounds who end up being effective MMA wrestlers, the examples I can think of like George St. Pierre and Robert Whittaker and Jose Aldo, they're all just phenomenal athletes with great high body awareness, and they worked really hard. I think it's that simple. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, my voice is like about to go, so let's finish this up. Last question from Theo Binst. I'm gonna say Binst. I think you're French, so I don't know how that would affect the pronunciation, but I'm not gonna check. Theo is gonna be an MMA fighter. He's gonna future UFC champion, I believe it says in his bio, perhaps. And he's like doing wrestling in his picture. So if you're a French guy that wrestles, then hats off. You're a unique character. And he asks a great question. Why do you think a lot of wrestlers from Oklahoma State make a great transition to MMA? Well, I think the first part of it would be a lot of wrestlers from Oklahoma State make the transition to MMA. So just sheer volume is probably the number one reason. This may seem like a bold claim to some people, but like if I'm going to pick a random school, Virginia Tech, if a lot of guys from Virginia Tech started doing MMA, you would start to see a lot of guys that went to Virginia Tech to wrestle being really good at MMA in a few years. It would happen. I'm telling you guys, I'm not overselling what kind of people like high-level college wrestlers and freestyle wrestlers are. Like, you haven't seen anything yet. You haven't seen anything. Like, barely scratching the surface in terms of talent. Like, you don't even know what's out there if you don't watch wrestling. Like, I'm not gonna say they would all like run over everyone automatically, but if they learned MMA and they like got good and they did things the right way, like if like 1% of them did it, you would have a bunch of contenders like fast. It would be unfair. So they probably shouldn't do it because it probably ruin the sport. Because everyone would be like, oh my god, it's all wrestlers. That's not to say they wouldn't end up having diverse fighting styles. Just people get protective over their martial arts bases. I guess that experiment from UFC 1 is still carried over. So I think there's a tradition of Okie State guys doing MMA. I forget who started that, but like Randy Couture is a good one. He was Okie State. Other reasons, I think they're pretty well-rounded and they're pretty crafty. In terms of well-roundedness, I mean they're great low leg attackers, which bodes well for getting easy entries in MMA, as we talked about with Aljo. Even though the finishes might not always be there. They're also really great like throw-bys and redirecting pressure from clinch positions, which is great because with the cage people are always trying to push you back, and with striking people just naturally try to push you back when they get into the clinch when they're not good clinch fighters. So that usually helps. And this isn't to say every Oklahoma State wrestler wrestles the same way. This is like kind of the meta of the school. They're really good on top these days. That's obviously a huge bonus. Nick Piccinini, who you'll see make his debut within a year or two, I would say. He's nails on top. He's great. So that's going to be a big deal. But yeah, I would say it's those factors. And also just like, I'm not going to say that the culture of the Midwest, I guess that's like the Southern Midwest, is fighty. But I think it's they have a fighty culture. Those guys are tough. They like to fight. They like to scrap. And they're also like super slick technicians most of the time, and they highly emphasize strength and conditioning, and they cut a lot of weight, so they're big. Those are all pretty good reasons. why. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, well, I'm exhausted, but I think that was pretty much almost all of them. Um, yeah, I'll do an episode next week. I'm gonna go on vacation soon, but I'll probably record an episode then too. And no guests on my radar for the future quite yet. I'll get some eventually. If you have any suggestions and you think someone's accessible, let me know. Chad Mendez, if you're listening, I would love to talk to you. Just about anything really. But wrestling would be a good thing to talk to you about if I can choose. Somebody tell Chad. But yeah, otherwise that's it. Follow me on Twitter at Edward Gallo MMA. Follow the Fight Site at fightsite.com. Give us your money on Patreon so we can pay our writers, so we can keep them writing. Please. They'll stop eventually if we never pay them. So I'm working on that. Your money is going to them. It is happening. They're getting paid. But I want to pay them more. So other sites don't steal them so we can keep the dream alive. But yeah, do that. And check out our YouTube channel and just generally support the site. And be cool and stay safe and, don't say anything racist. Don't be racist. I feel like that's necessary to say right now in these times. Try not to be a racist if you can. Okay? Cool. All right. See you guys later.